Chapter 8, Part 2. When he returned to the cabin with the books on the shelves and the kind man with the white hair and the gentle voice, all the boy carried was his book with one cover missing. The book that he couldn't understand. The summers he came home to take his father's place in the fields, for cabin rent had to be paid with field work. In the winter he seldom came because it took more than a day's walking and sleeping on the ground. Ain't worth it, his mother would say. Each year after he'd been gone for a whole winter and returned, the faithful Sounder would come hobbling on 3 legs far down the road to meet him. The great dog would wag his tail and whine. He never barked. The boy sang at his work in the fields, and his mother rocked in her chair and sang on the porch of the cabin. Sometimes when Sounder scratched fleas under the porch, she would look at the hunting lantern and the empty possum sack hanging against the wall. 6 crops of persimmons and wild grapes had ripened. The possums and raccoons had gathered them unmolested. The lantern and the possum sack hung unnoticed. No use to nobody no more, the woman said. The boy read to his brothers and sisters when he had finally finished his day in the fields. He read the story of Joseph over and over, never wearying of it. In all the books in the teacher's cabin, there's no story as good as Joseph's story, he would say to them. The woman, listening and rocking, would say, "The Lord has come to you, child. The Lord has certainly come to you." Late one August afternoon, the boy and his mother sat in the shaded corner of the porch. The heat and the drought of the dog days had parched the earth, and the crops had been laid by. The boy had come home early because there was nothing to do in the fields. "Dog days is a terrible time," the woman said. "It's when the heat is so bad that the dogs go mad." The boy would not tell her that the teacher had told him that the dog days got their name from the dog star, because it rose and set with the sun during that period. She had her own feeling for the earth, he thought, and he would not confuse it. "It's sure hot. It sure is hot," he insisted. "Lucky to come from the fields early." He watched the heave waves as they made the earth look like it was moving in little ripples. Sounder came around the corner of the cabin from somewhere, hobbled back and forth as far as the road several times, and then went to a cool spot under the porch. "That's what I said about dog days," the woman said. "Poor creature's been addled with the heat for 3 days. Can't find no place to quiet down. Been down the road. Nearly out of sight a second time today, and now he must come from fence rows. Whines all the time. A mad dog is a fearful sight. Slobbering at the mouth and running every which way 'cause they're blind. Have to shoot 'em before they bite some child. It's awful hard." "Sounder won't go mad," the boy said. "He's looking for a cooler spot, I reckon." A lone figure came on the landscape as a speck and slowly grew into a ripply form through the heat waves. "Scorchin' to be walking and totin' far today," she said as she pointed to the figure on the road. The catbird fussed in the wilted lilac at the corner of the cabin. "Why's that bird fussin' when there's no cat prowling?" Old folks has a saying that if the catbird's fussin' about nothing, something bad is coming. It's a bad sign. "Sounder, I reckon," said the boy. "He just passed her bush when he came around the cabin." In the tall locust at the edge of the fence, its top leaves yellowed from lack of water, a mockingbird mimicked the catbird with a half-dozen notes, decided it was too hot to sing, and disappeared. The Great Coon Dog, whose rhythmic panting came through the porch floor, came from under the house and began to whine. As the figure on the road drew near, it took shape and grew indistinct again in the wavering heat. Sometimes it seemed to be a person dragging something, for little puffs of red dust rose sulphurous clouds at every other step. Once or twice they thought it might be a brown cow or mule, dragging its hooves in the sand and raising and lowering its weary head. Sounder panted faster, wagging his tail, whined, moved from the doorway to the porch and back to the doorway. The figure came closer. Now it appeared to be a child carrying something on its back and limping. The children still at the creek?" she asked. "Yes, but it's about dry." Suddenly the voice of the great coon hound broke the sultry August deadness. The dog dashed along the road, leaving 3 pinpoint clouds of red dust to settle back on the earth behind him. The mighty voice rolled out upon the valley. Each flute-like bark echoed from slope to slope. "Lord's mercy, dog days done have made him mad." And the rocker was still. Sounder was a young dog again. His voice was the same mellow sound it had ridden in the November breeze from the lowlands to the hills. The boy and his mother looked at each other. The catbird stopped her fussing in the wilted lilac bush. On 3 legs, the dog moved at the same lightning speed that he had carried him to the throat of the grounded raccoon. Sounder's master had come home, taking what might have been measured as halting half steps and then pulling a stiff, dead leg forward. Dragging a foot towards sideways in the dust, the man limped into the yard. Saunders seemed to understand that to jump up and put his paw against his master's breast would topple him into the dust. So the great dog smelled and whined and wagged his tail and licked the limp hand dangling at his master's side. He hopped wildly around his master in a circle that almost brought his head and tail together. The head of the man was pulled to the side, where a limp arm dangled and where the foot pointed outward as it was dragged through the dust. What had been a shoulder was now pushed up and back to make one-sided hump, so high that the leaning head seemed to rest upon it. The mouth was askew too, and the voice came out as of the part farthest away from the withered, wrinkled, lifeless side. The woman in the still rocker said, "Lord, Lord," and sat, suffocated in shock. Sounder knew it was just like you was coming home from work, the boy said in a clear voice. Half of the voice of the man was gone too. In slow, measured stuttering, he told how he had been caught in the dynamite blast in the prison quarry, how the dead side had been crushed under an avalanche of limestone, and how he had been missed for a whole night in search for dead and wounded. He told how the pain of the crushed stone had stopped in the night, and how doctors had pushed and pulled the encased numb side of the body in a cast, how they had spoken kindly to him and told him he would die, but he resolved he would not die, even with a half-dead body, because he wanted to come home again. For being hurt, they let me have time off for my sentence, the man said, and since I couldn't work, I guess they was glad too. "The Lord has brought you home," the woman said. The boy had heard faint laughter somewhere behind the cabin. The children were coming home from the creek. He went around the cabin slowly, then hurried to meet them. "Pa's home," he said. He grabbed his sister, who had started to run toward the cabin. "Wait! He's mighty crippled up, so behave like nothing has happened." "Can we talk?" "Can he talk?" the youngest child asked. "Yes. And you don't you ask no questions." "You've been mighty natural and considerate," the mother said to the younger children later when she went to the woodpile and called them to pick up dry kindling for a quick fire. When she came back to the porch, she said, "We was going to have a cold piece 'cause it's so sultry, but now I think I'll cook." Everything don't change much, the boy thought. There's eating and sleeping and talking and setting that goes on. One day might be different from another, but they ain't much difference when they're put together. Sometimes there were long, quiet spells. Once or twice the boy's mother said to the boy, "He's powerful proud of your learning. Read something from the scriptures." But mostly they just talked about the heat and the cold and the wind and the clouds and what was going to be done and time passing. As the days of August passed and September brought signs of autumn, the crippled man sat on the porch step and leaned the paralyzed, deformed side of his body against the porch post. This was the only comfortable sitting position he could find. The old coon dog would lie facing his master, with his one eye fixed and his one ear raised. Sometimes he would tap his tail against the earth. Sometimes the ear would droop and the eye would close. Then the great muscles would flex in dreams of hunt, and the mighty chest would give off a muffled whisper of a bark. Sometimes the two limped together to the edge of the fields, or wandered off into the pine woods. They never went along the road. Perhaps they knew how strange a picture they would make as they walked together. About the middle of September, the boy left to go back to his teacher. It's the most important thing, his mother said. The crippled man said, "We're fine. We won't need nothing. I'll come for a couple of days before it's cold to help gather wood and walnuts." The broken body of the old man withered more and more, and when all the smells of harvest and hunt came with October, his spirit seemed to quicken his dragging steps. One day he cleaned his dusty lantern globe, and the old dog remembering, bounced on his 3 legs and wagged his tail as if to say, "I'm ready." The boy had come home. To gather the felled trees and chop the standing dead ones was part of the field pay too. He had been cutting and dragging timber all day. Sometimes he looked longingly at the lantern and possum sack, but something inside him had said, "Wait. Wait and go together." But the boy did not want to go hunting anymore. And without his saying anything, his father had said, "You're too tired, child. We ain't going far. No way." In the early darkness, the halting, hesitant swing of the lantern marked a slow path from field to pine woods towards a lowland. The boy stood on the porch, watching until the light was lost behind the pine branches. Then he went and sat by the stove, and his mother rocked and moved her kernel, and her mound of kernels grew in the fold of her aprons. "He's been mighty pert," she said. "I hope he don't fall in the dark. Maybe he'll be happy now he can go hunting again." She took up her singing where she left off. "Ain't nobody else gonna walk it for you. You gotta walk it by yourself." Sounders scratching at the door awakened the boy. It was still night, but the first red glow of dawn was rising in a faint crest over the pine woods. Sounder just couldn't poke slow enough for your father, the mother said to the boy as they stood in the doorway, straining and sifting the dark for some movement. "The lantern wouldn't burn out this time," the boy said. "No sign of light. He must have fallen or gotten tired. Sounder will show me." Sounder was already across the road and into the stockland, whining, moving his head from one side to the other, looking back to be sure that the boy was following. Across the stockland and into the pine woods, into the climbing, brightening glow of the dawn, the boy followed the dog, whose anxious pace slowed from age as they went. By a dog's age, Sounder is past dying time, the boy said half aloud. Fear he had prompted him to talk to himself. Deep in the pine woods, along the deserted logging road, the boy and the dog came to a small open space where had once been a log ramp. The sun was just beginning to drive the first splinters of light through the pines, bouncing against trees and trunks and earth. At the foot of one of the trees, the boy's father sat, the lantern burning by his side. So tuckered out he fell asleep, the boy said to himself. But the figure did not move when Sounder licked his hand. The boy put his hand on his father's good shoulder and shook it ever so gently. The chin did not lift itself. No eyes turned up to meet the boy. Tired, so tired. When the boy returned to the cabin and told his mother, her lips grew thin, long and thin and pale. When she finally spoke, they were warm and soft as when she sang. When life is so tiresome, there ain't no peace like the greatest peace, the peace of the Lord's hand holding you. And he'll have a store-bought box for burial, 'cause all these years I paid close attention to his burial insurance. They buried the boy's father in the unfenced lot behind the meeting house. The preacher stood amid the sumac and running briars before the mound of fresh red earth and read, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He make me lie down in green pastures."